Okay. Thank you to the Emily Dickinson International Society. Please be generous to them, to it. Thank you to Parak for organizing this and for that lovely introduction. It's wonderful to see friends from around the world. I'm really very happy to be here talking with you all about the letters. So, Spectral Power, New Avenues Opened by Dickinson's Letters, the new edition of Dickinson's Letters. In 1885, Emily Dickinson wrote to two acquaintances that a letter is a joy of earth. It is denied the gods. She sent it once in 2 lines as a short poem and once written out as prose. To her beloved Norcross cousins, Louisa and Frances, she wrote, "What is it that instructs a hand lightly created to impel shapes to eyes at a distance, which for them have the whole area of life or of death? Yet not a pencil in the street but has this awful power, though nobody arrests it. An earnest letter is, or should be, life warrant or death warrant. For what is each instant but a gun, harmless because unloaded, but that touched goes off." She also used the word power about letters when writing to Thomas Wentworth Higginson. "A letter always feels to me like immortality because it is the mind alone without corporeal friend. Indebted in our talk to attitude and accent, there seems a spectral power in thought that walks alone." So when I'm showing you slides, I will highlight in yellow the part that I'm reading if I'm giving you more than I'm reading. So you can decide whether you want to read the rest or not. This morning, I'm going to talk about the power or various articulations of spectral thought in Dickinson's letters and about the challenges of editing non-literary documents, i.e. letters. My guess is that many of you have already heard me talk about this new edition, and so I will try not to repeat myself while also saying enough about the edition to bring along those who've not already heard from me or read Domhnall's and my introduction. Especially about how this edition differs from the next most recent, now almost 70 years old. And of course, at the end, I'll take questions about anything I don't talk about or that you'd like more explanation about. In 1958, Thomas H. Johnson, with the assistance of Theodora Ward, published Dickinson's collected letters. Donald Mitchell and I began our new edition with the explicit goals of, 1, adding the over 200 letter poems Dickinson sent to correspondents and collecting the around 80 letters discovered and published since 1958 or never before published. 2, updating and correcting errors and text omissions in the Johnson Ward edition. And 3, presenting Dickinson in a new light that we think is more appropriate both to her experience and to the world we live in now. Specifically, we wanted our introduction, our annotation, and our apparatus to present Dickinson as a woman who lived fully and richly in her time. Johnson famously wrote that the fact is she did not live in history and held no view of it. In contrast, we contend that she was not an isolated poet genius enabled to write by shutting out as much as possible of the world. She lived with attention and absorption in her world, and the mundane details of her life contribute meaningfully to who she was and what she wrote. By mundane details, I mean the house and garden work she did with her mother and sister and with the domestic workers employed by the family, her social activities with friends, and her observations about weather, flowers, birds, cats, flies, chickens, and so on. Similarly, her daily life was influenced by the newspapers and contemporary literature she was reading, and by her continual reaching out to friends and neighbors through letters, even when she was refusing most visitors in person, although we think that she saw more people face to face than legend allows. Following this same logic, We regard it as significant to identify women, townspeople, and servants with whom Dickinson interacts, including information about their first names, which Johnson and Ward don't always do, but also race, ethnicity, education, and employment, if known. Johnson and Ward focused on identifying professional men, even when Dickinson wrote primarily to those men's wives. And Dickinson did have remarkably successful and high-ranking friends, but we want to indicate the entire spectrum of her personal life. Our approach is based on current understanding of what it means to edit both literary and historical documents, such as letters. Editing is interpretive, critical work. It is not simple compilation and collection. No editorial decisions are neutral. All mediate the text to readers and to some extent define the readership desired or addressed. In relation to this edition, we would also say that editorial work is not just about providing notes or a platform to understand in the classic sense of deciphering meaning. All individuals, including Dickinson, live in families or communities amidst the responsibilities and contingencies of their time. Sharpening our sense of Dickinson as a human being entails seeing her in relation to those networks. For example, we note not just who she corresponds with, but the number of friends and family members who spend days, weeks, or years living in the Dickinson house or next door in the Evergreens, Austin and Susan's house, and the Dickinson's family ongoing travel to visit their friends. To give just two from many, many examples, the young relatives Anna and Clara Turner Newman spent 11 years living with Austin and Sue. And Dickinson herself lived with her Norcross cousins, Louise and Frances, for a total of over a year during 1864 and 1865, when she was undergoing eye treatment in Cambridge. Dickinson wrote in 1846 that it would be really remarkable to call upon a lady who has not a sister, niece, or cousin spending the winter with her this year. Even at her most reclusive, Dickinson interacted daily with family, sometimes extended family, and domestic workers, and she engaged through messages to many people, and we think there were at least some ongoing visits from a few neighbors. Such context does not affect the content of any letter as such, but it may lead people to a changed view of the poet's composite life. People who previously regarded Dickinson as remote or aloof will, we hope, find strong connections to her and to their own lives in these details of Dickinson's living. They may even see here potential models for differently valuing their own present or future desires for commingling, solitude, and affectionate companionship in a fulfilled life. Our annotation also demonstrates Dickinson's reading of national and international news by pointing out the probable sources of many of her letter references and by providing context for what may be historical allusions. We also note much of the contemporary British and American literature she was reading, much of it almost immediately after publication. For example, in 1863, she writes, "I noticed that Robert Browning had made another poem and was astonished till I remembered that I myself in my smaller way sang off Charnel's steps." In this letter, there are two contemporary references. First, to an edition of Browning's works reported in the 27th of December Springfield Republican Weekly and a new Browning poem, Christmas Eve and Easter Day. And second, Dickinson may refer to the December 31st through January 3rd Battle of Stones River, Tennessee. This battle freed Middle Tennessee from Confederate control, but with an estimated 23,000 casualties. Giving information about both the recent publication and this battle enables readers to see why we date this letter as late December 1862, late December 1862, early January 1863. Johnson dates it 1864, ? More playfully, in another letter, Dickinson compares Vinnie to two British politicians. "Thank you with love for the kindness," she writes to Lou and Fanny. "It would be very sweet to claim if we needed it, but we are quite strong, and mother, well, as usual. And Vinnie, spectacular as Disraeli and sincere as Gladstone, was only sighing in fun. When she sighs in earnest, Emily's throne will tremble, and she will need both Lou and Fanny, but Vinnie still prevails. As our note indicates, following the April death of Benjamin Disraeli, who was the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, Gladstone, his rival, had him commemorated in Westminster Abbey. On May 11, the Springfield Republican described this gesture as evidence of Gladstone's noble grace and free sincerity. We date Dickinson's letter about mid 1881, so in reference to that note in the Springfield Republican. A third example is an echo of Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade, first published in 1854, just 8 years before Dickinson borrows its rhythmic patterns, suggesting that poem is by now well enough known in the U.S. for her to assume the Norcrosses will recognize her allusion. In the letter informing them of Fraser Stearns' death, Dickinson writes, "Just as he fell in his soldier's cap with his sword at his side, Fraser rode through Amherst, classmates to the right of him and classmates to the left of them." So Tennyson's cannons to the right and cannons to the left. In this case, we do not mention the Tennyson allusion because there are so many other more directly pertinent things that we feel we need to note, but we trust that it will be familiar to many readers. Eleanor Higginbotham describes Dickinson's letters with some friends as enacting a kind of book club because of their many contemporary literary allusions. Relatively little theorizing has been done on the editing of non-literary documents, but annotation has received some attention. According to Wim van Mierlo, annotation is a contextual and hermeneutic device to bridge the gap between the literary work that has come to us from the past and the reader's present. It directs the process of reading and interpretation, even in what it does not present. Think of the difference between annotation in a Norton anthology, which is intended for high school students and college students, and that in a Variorum scholarly edition. So, for example, Franklin's 3-volume poems. Annotation, to some extent, defines the kind of reader addressed. When Johnson and Ward edited Dickinson's letters in 1958, biographical information and critical commentary on the poet was far more limited than it is now. Consequently, their annotation contains both information and repeated speculation about her life. We, in contrast, include biographical information only if it is not now commonly known or easily found and is of immediate reference to the letter. For example, where someone is when they're outside of Amherst, or what would prompt us to assign a particular date. This decision reflects our stance that editorial speculation is inappropriate. Nevertheless, we know that our annotation is not neutral. It makes implied critical arguments about Dickinson's life, while also providing what we hope is useful information for a national and international audience. As just indicated, implicitly, we argue through the kinds of information we provide that Dickinson was current in the literature and politics of her time, and that her friends and acquaintances range from scores of people with college or higher degrees and prestigious professions to dressmakers, grocers, gardeners, and domestic workers. We hope that all readers feel welcomed by our mode and level of providing information and are not distracted from a letter by its annotation. Some readers will want more, some might want less. We've tried to strike a balance. And we had a strict word count from Harvard University Press. A letter is generally defined as communication, usually in the first person or involving direct personal address sent by one party to another through the post, by messenger, or by some other technology, for example, email. When a poem is sent in or as a letter, it takes on this patina of direct personal communication. Little has been written on the question of whether Dickinson sending poems in or as letters makes the individual poem function less as literary and more as occasional or strictly personal communication. Although Virginia Jackson implies as much when she argues that sent poems should be read historically and not as lyrics. On the other hand, since she argues generally that Dickinson did not write lyric poetry, she doesn't seem to be making a strong distinction between based on epistolary. The 148 poems that Dickinson did not retain in a copy of her own and so come to us only through their recipients are largely occasional, that is, written for a particular moment in time. But again, no one has studied this subset in relation to other poems circulated or not, and as to whether they were circulated as letter poems or as embedded in letters, and how this might affect our reading of them. Judith Scholes has done the most work on this topic in distinguishing letter poems, embedded letters, and enclosed poems. Wonderful work. One of the most significant differences between our volume and the 1958 edition is that we include all letter poems that bear any indication that they were circulated as letters. That is, if they either contain some form of address or a signature. The great majority of Dickinson's poems were, to our knowledge, never circulated, and many were sent to two or more people in whole or part, as well as being retained. In contrast, while Dickinson occasionally repeats phrases from one letter to another, sometimes even a few sentences, she, to my knowledge, never sends an entire identical letter to more than one person. Perhaps the closest she comes are in two notes that we place next to each other, one to Susan, the other to Jeannie Greenough. The first reads only, "Lest any hen should boast." The second, "Lest any bee should boast." Both paraphrase Ephesians 2:9, "Lest any man should boast." Presumably, they accompanied gifts of eggs and honey, respectively, and their primary purpose was to share a witty allusion with the recipient, not to express a profound, private feeling or revelation. At least relative privacy is a generic aspect of letters, although issues of repeated language and how letters functioned practically among family and friends in mid-19th century Amherst are open to further investigation. Perhaps Dickinson emphasizes the spectral power of letters, language that walks alone, because in her family, letters were simultaneously private and always potentially a shared genre. While in 1886 she writes to Elizabeth Holland, "Send no union letters. A mutual plum is not a plum. I was too respectful to take the pulp and do not like a stone." In fact, there's ample evidence that Dickinson addressed letters to two people, including Elizabeth and Josiah Holland, with some frequency. And she and her sister also corresponded jointly with some people. Dickinson also speaks for others. Her letters frequently conclude with brief notes from her mother, Vinnie, and other family members and friends, as many people conclude letters. I know I do. Moreover, letters she received were sometimes read aloud. This practice is most pronounced as Dickinson describes it in Letters to Austen. She reports to him, for example, that "Father reads all your letters before he brings them home," and so warns him not to say anything about a particular topic in the next letter you write me. She writes that her father delivered a letter from Austen to her and waited himself in order to have me read it. I reviewed the contents hastily, striking out also suspicious places, and then very artlessly and unconsciously began. My heart went pit-a-pat till I got safely by a remark concerning Martha. In the same letter, she reports that Maddie brings Sue's letters and reads them aloud it's not clear to whom she's reading them, but at least at Emily and Lavinia. Earlier in 1851, she writes of the family enjoying one of Austen's letters together after church. "We have all been laughing till the old house rung again at your delineation of men, women, and things." Her next letter to Austen ends with a typical list of messages for Austen to dispense. Give our love to our friends and tell them we will write them and let them know our plans as soon as we hear from you. Thank them, if you please, for their kind invitation and tell them we are coming not to see sights, but them, and therefore all the stillness will not incommode us. I saw Martha Friday. She inquired all about you and said she was going to write. And Susie, too, that I could send next time. Father says your letters are altogether before Shakespeare, and he will have them published to put in our library. Emily Fowler's regards. Love from us all. Your AF sister, Emily. And she reports in June 1851 that Edward threatened to publish Austen's comments on Jenny Lind in the newspaper, not just for the family library. He thought they were so wonderful. Dickinson's early letters to Abaya and other girlfriends also report on and deliver messages from multiple friends. Letters have power to make people laugh, grieve, think, and to strengthen bonds of friendship and love. These descriptions of sharing letters within the family and among friends are quite different from her poems, representing letters as hidden within her bosom and read in secret. Cheryl Weaver has done excellent work on Dickinson's letter to her early girlhood friends, including on ways that friends were encouraged to write jointly, even physically, on each other's letters, or to attach notes to each other's letters. Paul Crumley has written on letters in relation to and themselves as a kind of gift exchange. Paul's and Eleanor's and other wonderful essays are in Jane Eberwein and Cindy McKenzie's Reading Emily Dickinson's Letters. Clearly, for Dickinson, the genre of letter includes a range of modes. Our edition also bends other elements of the typical definition of a letter. For example, we include abandoned, which is to say unsent letters. We also include some drafts. It is important, however, to note, as we do in our introduction, that Dickinson did not, to our knowledge, draft most letters, despite Johnson's and Franklin's claims to this effect. There are few extant drafts, and they are mostly to a few people, such as Otis Lord. There are, however, a larger number of abandoned letters. Unclear why they were abandoned. We also include letters that are so brief and impersonal that only the fact of their circulation would make anyone consider them letters. Think back to the two notes I just read, lest any something should boast. Or a late note to Sarah Jenkins that reads in its entirety, area, no test of depth. Again, interesting work might be done on the effect of Dickinson's one sentence or one phrase messages, either in relation to her poems or as they might alter a conception of letters, right? So there's no first person here. There's no address to an individual. So you get the point. While Dickinson understands that letters may have the awful power of a death warrant, presumably when they convey terrible news, most of her own letters might instead be understood as life warrants. By the late 1870s, she was writing frequent letters, the primary point of which was to communicate, I care about you, or I notice and appreciate that you were caring for me. In early 1873, she writes, Sue makes sick days so sweet, we almost hate our health. In April 1885, she writes to Sarah Tuckerman, morning without you is a dwindled dawn. Then closes, except a loving caw from a nameless friend. We think this note indicates that she did see Sarah Tuckerman on at least some mornings. Another letter inspired by birds and the return of Cornelia and Joseph Sweetser to Amherst in 1878 reads, Sweet Mrs. Nellie comes with the robins. Would she remain with the robins, April would need no codicil. But Mrs. Nellie has wings, ours have wings, riches have wings. Wings are a mournful perquisite. A society for the suppression of wings would protect us all. Her thank yous are repeated. To Frances Norcross in 1873, thank you, dear, for the love. She then writes to the Hollands, it's the next letter in our edition, in early summer 1873, I was thinking of thanking you for the kindness to Vinnie. She has no father and mother but me, and I have no parents but her. In December of that year, Higginson writes to her, "This note shall go as a New Year's gift and assure you that you were not forgotten." And she responds, "Thank you, dear friend, for my new year, but did you not confer it?" To Mabel Loomis Todd in 1882, in thanking her for Indian pipes, she writes, "I know not how to thank you. We do not thank the rainbow, although its trophy is a snare. To give delight is hallowed." Dickinson both extravagantly acknowledges gifts and messages that give her delight, and she gives delight, which she calls the toil of angels. For the brief remainder of this presentation, I want to say a few words about the primary challenges Domhnall and I confronted in working on the letters and the implications they may have for future scholarship. First, of course, was the work of transcribing. We transcribed afresh from individual manuscripts for every letter and then proofed and proofed and proofed. We want this letter above all, this edition above all, to be accurate. In this process, we found several typically small errors in Johnson's transcriptions, and we found remarkable omissions from Todd's transcriptions, material she herself canceled and replaced with ellipses, in which Johnson then repeated exactly as she had printed the letters, that is, with her ellipses. A restoration of such omitted text is, we think, a major contribution of this edition. Second most time-consuming was the work of redating. And I want to acknowledge Al Habiger's meticulous scholarship on redating correspondences, and in pointing to some omissions in Tad's transcriptions as well. Dating was primarily Domhnall's task, and he was brilliant at reading other people's letters, diaries, newspapers Dickinson was known to have read, and in looking at Ebenezer Snell's weather records in order to assign more precise or new dates to letters. Dickinson was a bit of a language magpie, as we've already indicated in that letter where she refers to Vinnie as sincere as Gladstone right after reading in the Springfield Republican the note about Gladstone's sincerity. Another note that Johnson prints as to Mrs. Jonathan Jenkins, date unknown, although sometime in 1883, we publish as to Sarah Jenkins, so we always use women's first names, as sent on January 13, 1883, because we know that on this date, Austin took the train to Pittsfield to visit the Jenkinses. Dickinson frequently wrote letters for Austin to deliver when he was visiting their mutual friends. A note to Samuel Bowles, the younger, the Johnson dates about 1883. We date April 1883 because we believe it may signal that Dickinson knew about a dinner at the Lotus Club in New York on April 13th, where Bowles was celebrated, and his father, so the father was Dickinson's friend, was also recognized for his contributions to American journalism. In many of these instances, we have no explicit evidence that Dickinson read something. And so we don't say dated, Dickinson read this newspaper or Dickinson knew about this event. We just put the information there and we allow readers to draw their own conclusions about the likelihood of the connection, but also to see why we are making the decision we have in reference to a date. In the writing notes, which Johnson calls prose fragments and does not date at all, we date a lovely note as about July 1884. Dickinson writes, "Science is very near us. I found a megatherium on my strawberry." A megatherium is an extinct giant ground sloth. Amherst owned the casts of a megatherium skeleton. This hilarious representation of what was probably a slug becomes somewhat less mysterious when we discovered that the July 3rd Springfield Republican reported that a Williams College commencement speaker referred to a megatherium. So we imagine that Dickinson read the newspaper's description and couldn't resist using this word somewhere, although we have no knowledge whether she ever actually used it in a letter. Again, this is an example of our finding evidence that we point to, although we can't state as a fact that Dickinson used the word for this reason or on a particular date. The next most time-consuming and significant task of our edition was to put letters and letter poems into new sequences. We were attempting to place letters in a narrative of communication or exchange, even when we don't have a precise date for a letter. In this process, I took the lead. For example, in 1884, the Johnson edition places 7 letters to Susan, immediately preceding 6 to Cornelia Sweetser, followed closely by 4 to Ellen Mather. All are dated about 1884. We find such sequences grouping notes to a single recipient to be misleading in relation to Dickinson's correspondence or anybody's correspondence. Nobody writes several notes to one person and then several notes to another person and so on. Several of these about 1884 notes contained internal evidence indicating that they were sent over the course of the entire year. For example, the first of the letters to Susan we place among letters written in January or February of 1884. We reconceived the sequence of letters to Nellie Sweetser, dating what we regard as the first 2 in mid-June 1884, interspersed among notes to Ellen Mather, Abigail Cooper, and Susan, and we dispersed the remaining notes to her across the summer and early fall among the rest of her correspondence to neighbors and friends. We imagine that Dickinson was exchanging food and notes with Nellie across the entire summer and not just at a particular moment. We hope that such resequencing helps readers see Dickinson's individual relationships in a new light in themselves and also as part of a network of friendship. A wonderful example of someone who has done this recently is Karen Sanchez Epler's essay on Dickinson's correspondence with Catherine Sweetser, her Aunt Kate, although Kate is not a neighbor. The final major challenge I'll mention has to do with our thorough new annotation, but I've already talked about that a bit. Additionally, our edition provides all letters written to Dickinson, along with the page numbers where you'll find them. This includes those that Johnson prints as notes to other letters, which makes them very hard to find, and a few new ones, which were saved because Dickinson drafted letters on the clean side of the letters she received. I'm going to conclude by reading 3 letters to give you a sense of the multiple registers in which Dickinson writes. The first one also provides 2 examples of text that Todd and Johnson omit and that we restore. This is to the Norcrosses, and here's a copy of the transcript. You see what Todd crossed out and replaced with ellipses. Here's the letter as we present it. Dear children, nothing has happened but loneliness, perhaps too daily to relate. Carlo is consistent, has asked for nothing to eat or drink since you went away. Mother thinks him a model dog and conjectures what he might have been had not Vinny demoralized him. Margaret objects to furnace heat on account of bone decrepitude, so I dwell in my bonnet and suffer comfortably. And this was omitted. Father didn't go to Northampton. The omnibus meeting was postponed, so I have to roast meat and vegetables against my will. Miss Kay called last evening to inspect her garden. I gave her a lantern and she went out, and thanks you very much. No one has called so far but one old lady to look at a house. I directed her to the cemetery to spare expense of moving. I got down before Father this morning and spent a few moments profitably with the South Sea Rose. Father, detecting me, advised wiser employment and read at Family Devotions the chapter of the Gentleman with One Talent. I think he thought my conscience would adjust the gender. Margaret washed today and accused Vinny of calicos. I put her shoe and bonnet in to have them nice when she got home. I found a milliner's case in Miss N's wardrobe and have opened business. I've removed a geranium leaf and supplied a lily in Vinny's parlor vase. The sweet peas are unchanged. Cattle show is tomorrow. The coops and committees are passing now. A, that's Austin, calls for food and superior solace. They are picking the Baldwin apples. Be good children and mind the vicar. Tell me precisely how Wakefield looks, since I go not myself. I'm now going to read another letter to the Norcrosses, in part because I think this correspondence has been unfairly neglected, but also to show you an example of one of Todd's omissions that we cannot fill in because it's from a Todd transcript, not a Norcross transcript. There is that which is called an awakening in the church, and I know of no choicer ecstasy than to see Mrs. roll out in crepe every morning is supposed to intimidate Antichrist. At least it would have that effect on me. It reminds me of Don Quixote demanding the surrender of the windmill, and of Sir Stephen Toplift, and of Sir Alexander Cockburn. Spring is a happiness so beautiful, so unique, so unexpected, that I don't know what to do with my heart. I dare not take it, I dare not leave it. What do you advise? Life is a spell so exquisite that everything conspires to break it. What do I think of Middlemarch? What do I think of glory, except that in a few instances this mortal has already put on immortality? George Eliot is one. The mysteries of human nature surpass the mysteries of redemption. For the infinite we only suppose, while we see the finite. And here are the ellipses that are Todd's, but that we can't, there's nothing we can do to fill them in. I launch Vinny on Wednesday. It will require the combined efforts of Maggie, Providence, and myself. For whatever advances Vinny makes in nature and art, she has not reduced departure to a silence. Your loving, Emily. So again, the printer's copy. This is Todd's handwriting. And then finally, I'll read a letter to Austin Dickinson. This is a letter poem, and it's the only instance, the only extant copy of this letter. The fact that earth is heaven, whether heaven is heaven or not, if not an affidavit of that specific spot, not only must confirm us that it is not for us, but that it would affront us to dwell in such a place. And as you'll notice, Dickinson signs this letter with a line, which he does for many letters in the mid-1870s and a few later. Here, Dickinson seems to be saying in part not only that earth is heaven, but that love, like letters, is a joy of earth. Domhnall and I hope that you will find in these letters abundant joy as well as provocative spectral power. Thank you.